Are MMOs dying? Well, no, but they certainly are changing. Over the past 15 years, I've seen this genre that I absolutely love go from the whole focus of my life to be kind of like a niche, even in the gaming community, especially in the PC gaming community. And I wanted to kind of talk about the changes that have happened within the MMO niche and go over the ones that I think are kind of the bigger issues, but also understanding why they have happened. So sit down, grab a cup, let's talk about why MMOs seem like they're on the decline. So keep in mind, these are all in no particular order. The first thing that comes to mind when you're talking about the decline of MMOs, or at least the perception of a decline of MMOs, is going to be monetization. Let's be serious. Everyone talks about that first and foremost because that's usually what decides even if someone is going to go ahead and play the game. A lot of different MMOs, and some of the more popular ones will even say, all usually have a free trial or some way that you can experience the game before actually playing it, which is great, of course. And then even some MMOs are just straight up free to play. Fantastic. A lot of players really enjoy it. I love being able to try a game before I even have to pay any kind of money for it, and then deciding if it's something I'm going to want to do. I love it. That's great. That's something that I've seen. The problem that I feel like a lot of MMO players have is, one, the major titles will say, I just talk about the major titles. I talk about World of Warcraft. I talk about Final Fantasy, have a monthly subscription, which is always a pain that always comes up of why players don't want to play it. I don't want to pay money to keep playing a game that I already own. Fair. The other aspect is the in-game cash shops. The in-game monetization is kind of ridiculous. Now, I won't even say that across the board all MMOs are the same. If you look at like Guild Wars 2, I love their gem store. I love that model just because you're able to get in-game gold and exchange it for the gems and then use the gems to purchase. I mean, you could purchase expansions and things like that just by farming in-game. Excellent. I like that kind of idea because it's my time. I can put my time into the game, earn this, and get this piece. Fantastic, I like it. The more negative side are the kind of like buy for power or the buy for extra convenience, where sometimes the games will throttle themselves purposely and then sell you the remedy, the fix for that issue back through their in-game cash shop. So I look at like convenience items like I talk about Guild Wars 2. Like the extra bag spaces, the extra banker spaces, things along those lines, where Guild Wars 2 is notorious for flooding you with a ton of items, and then you don't have too much of bag space, so you kind of have to filter through what's important and what's not, and then you constantly, if you have 100 slots, you could have 30 of them constantly filled with just these things that after killing 2 mobs, it's like bing, bam, there you go. This isn't the case for everything. There are other convenience methods, we'll say, so like leveling skips and class skips and things along those lines that kind of lead themselves into a negative perception, because now you're just buying all these different things that are going to make your user experience. You're buying it to save time, essentially, is what you're doing. And I kind of feel like that eats at the root of what MMORPGs, and I'll talk about that here in a second, but I feel like it eats at the root of what makes MMORPGs kind of grand in their own sense, is because there is a certain level of grind. And as mentioned, that'll be covered up next. But the idea of being able to have all of these kind of convenience factors implemented into the game kind of feels like predatory almost in that regard. Now, I won't even mention the different cosmetics and, skins and all these other different things that are implemented into the game. Partially the reason that I actually don't like having excessive amounts of skins and different options and all these non-power oriented things is because I feel like that takes time away from the developers. So instead of having a full team of developers working on the game, creating good content, focusing on that, you end up having to divert some of your power to go ahead and make these unique skins or what have you. And they wouldn't do it, let me put it this way, if people weren't buying it. And I do understand that games companies across the board, they're in it to make money. They like what they do, but they are a business, and I understand that aspect. However, I feel like that leads to the decline of MMOs because a lot of negative thoughts come around when you talk about either a monthly sub or an overly focused cash shop that makes players just have a bad taste in their mouth and they don't want to even participate. They don't even want to play the game because they don't want to be constantly be fed an ad, which is understandable. So that could definitely hurt the perception of MMORPGs and lead to the decline of them. And I do have to just take a quick shot at the Quinfall, which just recently released into early access. Oh, the game had bugs and issues all over the place, but you best believe that in-game cash shop was ready to go, ready to take your money. The next bit that I'd like to talk about is going to be the time requirement, the grind for MMOs, and why I think it's actually kind of starting to lead to the decline or the perception of why people don't like MMOs anymore. MMORPGs in and of themselves are heavy time sinks. Now, if you look at like other games, other, story ARPG games, or just even regular RPG games, you could expect anywhere between like 30 to 50 hours worth of gameplay content. I mean, they're upwards of like, 100 to 200, depending on the game. But the idea of it is that a lot of these MMOs usually have some type of grind, either a grind to level up to max, or a grind for better gear, or a grind to unlock something for your account or your character. That is intrinsically tied to what MMOs do. And that is something that I have loved about it, especially when I was younger and I had untold amounts of time to just sit down and grind on something. I ended up getting the title The Insane in World of Warcraft, which required you to do all these different reputation grinds and really bust butt to figure all that stuff out and to do all this, and it was tedious, but I earned a really cool title that was unique that not very many people had. The most recent grinds that I've done in MMOs have just been either just really leveling in Final Fantasy or getting my jobs up to an appropriate level. Like, that kind of stuff I understand. I go into MMOs, of course, being a bit seasoned, knowing that that is going to be a requirement. I think part of the issue that a lot of players end up having with MMOs, and especially older MMOs, will say anything greater than like 5 or 6 years that's still up and running, still producing content, is that there is just so much content to do. There's so much that you can go through at any given time, at any given day. You could sink hundreds of thousands of hours into MMOs, into a single MMO, if you truly wanted to. That is a blessing because the replayability is usually very good. You can try it out with a different class, you could try it out with a different character and, have that experience or unlock all these side stories and stuff like that. There's such an immersive world that goes into it. However, I feel like a lot of the older generation who have played MMOs for a while, who are like me, I have a job, a full-time career, and 3 kids, and, I'm doing this YouTube thing on the side. I mean, my days are usually very full. I don't have 7 or 8 hours to sit in a game and just grind out and play the game. That's just not feasible anymore. And I feel like a lot of MMO players, especially the seasoned ones, are up that mindset. Inflation's high. Like, I gotta work. I gotta make money. I gotta do these different things to keep my real life going. I can't spend 10 hours a day, not in my current lifestyle. And I feel like a lot of MMO players, the older ones, are of like mine. Conversely, if we look at like newer players or younger players, MMOs probably aren't that interesting. But you would usually have to commit a significant amount of time to get anything reasonable within the game. And that is kind of an understanding. Like, of course, we're playing MMOs. You know that there's going to be a bit of a grind. I look at like comparatively like Path of Exile 2. An ARPG, I was able to get to max level in about 45 hours and get into endgame and do all that, and I could have just gone through there. I played all the way through Stormblood in Final Fantasy XIV, which is their second expansion. It's all part of the free trial, and I was nearly eclipsing 500 hours into the game, and I played mostly just the story and all the important side missions, and there was only a few and far between at the end of the expansions. That is insane. And that's not me going through every nook and cranny. That is just me doing basically the bare minimum, as bad as that sounds. But the idea of it is that MMOs are notably for all these large time commitments. And I feel like that is leading to the perception of the decline of MMOs, because many players don't necessarily want to have to put in, 200-300 hours into a game just to get to the good part. I mean, many people talk about how the beginning bit of Final Fantasy is kind of boring, but the game does pick up and the story does get great, but you have to put in quite a bit of time. And many players look at that and say, it's just not going to be for me. It's just not feasible. And I feel like a lot of players look at that and they say the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze. One of the biggest bits that I've seen kind of leading into the decline of MMOs has been the lack of social interaction. And let me preface this by saying it's not that there isn't the capability of social interactions. It's just a lot less incentivized. Let me explain. Way back during Burning Crusade, the original World of Warcraft Burning Crusade, when I really started playing World of Warcraft and that was my MMO, I remember sitting in Shatrath City asking for people to join me in for the Arcatraz. I needed a tank, or I needed a healer, or we were going to go and do Gruul's Lair and we needed ranged DPS. You know, asking that in the trade chat and hoping someone picked that up. And listing your group and saying, hey, you know, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for. Like that kind of stuff, that was forcing us to have these social interactions, and you end up making friends and making a bond because you were almost incentivized to create these lasting groups. Nowadays in MMOs, I feel like part of the decline is that you don't need to do that. Not with looking for groups, not for raid finders, not for dungeon finders, duty roulettes, and all these other factors that just allow you to just instantly queue into anything that the game has to offer. And I feel like that leads to one of the most important aspects of MMORPGs, because then you're just playing a solo game with other players nearby. And yes, you tag team and join in, but I could join a duty roulette in Final Fantasy XIV and not say a word. Just literally just log in. Hey, what's up? And then do my business and then leave. And that was my social interaction. I say this that it was added as a convenience factor, which I will talk about here in a bit. But a lot of what ended up making MMOs really that much fun were these social interactions, were these little, you know, someone puts out an emote, or, you know, someone comes over to you and is dancing around you and is jumping around and having this kind of like fun little interaction. And then you type in, say, hey, what's going on? And you're able to strike up this conversation. Mind you, you can still do that. However, in my experience, MMOs nowadays feel very much everyone's there. We're all riding a crowded bus, but everyone's on their phones. You know, like nobody's really reaching out to try to have these interactions or have these, unless you're in like an RP crowd, and that's something that you guys like to do. It feels more together, but more disjointed, I guess, if that makes sense. I understand why they added those kind of features to add into the game to make essentially queuing up for important things faster. I get that, I do, but it kind of leads to a less engaging experience with MMOs. And I feel like that's partly what leads to the decline, or at least the perception of the decline, is because people aren't really doing that unless you go out of your way. And following up with that, one of the things that I've definitely noticed is back when MMOs were in their heyday and there was only like 2 or 3 notable MMOs that people played, it felt more together because everyone was there, because we weren't quote unquote on our phones in game. Everyone was able to join in and have this experience back and forth with each other, which was fantastic. It's one of the best features of the game. There are so many MMORPGs out there now that it is absolutely insane. I don't think MMOs necessarily have gotten less popular or anything like that. I do feel like they are still popular, and I still feel like they are drawing in new players and things along those lines. I think the problem is that there are so many MMOs that people can play that they have gone ahead and split out into their different games. There are so many people, there's only so many players who are enjoying these games, and they've all gone to their respective ones, or they're trying out new ones. And it makes the worlds feel less full and less engaging. But like, oh, I don't know where Johnny is. Johnny hasn't logged in, you know, to Black Desert Online in a week. Where's he? Oh, I think he was trying ESO out. They had a free weekend and he was doing that. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's where he went. And I feel like that leads to the perception that MMOs are on the decline because many different players are just going off and playing what game that they like because there's so many choices. I mean, even just looking at like, you have World of Warcraft, which World of Warcraft, by the way, can be split down into like 4 different games. You have retail, you have classic hardcore, you have season of discovery. That's just within that game, one game, just in World of Warcraft. That's not even talking about WoW Ascension, which is a side product. There's so many different splits of where people are going just within the MMO genre, which is, of course, meant to be a large mass amount of players who are enjoying a game. That's not even to say that they aren't splitting off and playing other games that aren't MMOs, which I'll talk about here in a minute, but the idea of it is that there's so many splits of where players are going that it feels like the worlds are less engaging. And I love hearing it. People always say, oh, it's a dead game, it's a dead MMO. I don't know necessarily if that's always the case, but it does sometimes feel that there's just not as many players who are in the game. And I think the stats will show. It's just people are going off and doing other games that are important to them. And lastly, I think part of the reason that MMOs feel like they're on the decline is just because there hasn't really been any good MMOs that have come out recently that have really knocked the socks off, changed the industry, kept and retained great player engagement, things along those lines. A lot of the times what will happen, and if you look at like Throne and Liberty, which is the most recent one that was the most popular, came out and it peaked like 300,000 or something like that, which is incredible for a first day for an MMO, especially free-to-play MMO. It has dwindled down to, I think, like 5% of that total. Like, I think the average is like 15 to 20,000 people logging in at any given time to play Throne and Liberty, which is still it's not nothing to snuff at, but again, just that sharp drop all the way from there. I feel like a lot of that is because people will just dip in and out. They try the new MMO. They're like, this isn't really something that's exciting. This isn't something that I enjoy. I'm going to go back to the one MMO that I really, really enjoy playing, which is, Elder Scrolls Online or, Final Fantasy 14. The idea is that, like, MMOs really, the ones that have released of late, haven't really captured that thrill, that excitement, that attention-grabbing way that the old MMOs, especially when they dropped expansions, were. I mean, I even look at, like, in my mind, out of the big three that have released recently, Throne and Liberty, Quinfall, and Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, actually, I enjoyed the most. And it has been, I think, the least popular out of the three. Quinfall has been all over the place. And it's kind of put a negative perception on the gaming community or MMO community as a whole. And that I kind of get, honestly. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But I guess the idea of it is that there are so many different choices, and when new games come out, when new MMOs come out, they are failing to hit the mark, which is not helping the community, not helping the market of MMORPGs at all, really. I think part of the reason that it will continue to be this way is because, unfortunately, we keep getting very unfinished products, very unfinished MMOs that are coming out into early access that aren't even ready for their early access debut. All this negativity and all this decline talk of MMOs, I want to kind of go back and say there's a reason why this is all happening. Part of the reason that MMOs, I feel, are perceived to be on the decline is, of course, the things that I've listed above, but I actually feel like it's because the gaming niche is changing. That MMO niche is changing. So I talk about the monetization. A lot of MMOs are free to play, and a lot of the times the way that they make money is either through making expansions and selling the expansions, or things that are in-game cash shops. They are a business, and they are trying to do what they can to pay their developers, pay their publisher, because of course publishers suck all the life and joy out of everyone. But the idea is that they have to make these things so that people will keep playing their game and that they can make money. I understand that. I absolutely give them credit where credit is due. However, with most of these MMOs, and especially even, let's look at the subscription-based ones, you can pick up and play whenever you want and then turn it off when you don't. Okay, you know what? I'm going to dip into World of Warcraft and try out the new content for a month. I'll pay the $15. Once that elapses, this really wasn't worth it. Okay, bam, I'm done. No harm, no foul. There we go. Same with Final Fantasy 14. Oh, there's a content lull? Yeah, you know what? I think I'll take a break from it and play something else. A lot of the MMOs have shifted into this idea of pick up and play whenever you want to. And especially like the free-to-play models, the MMOs that really have to hammer in the cash shop, is because it does take time and effort, and they do have to make money off the product. And a lot of it ends up having to be making slightly inconvenient things in game and selling you the convenience. That happens. That is something that I have seen frequently, and I kind of understand why. It's not necessarily a great thing, but I understand why. Now, looking at like the grinding, and I talk about the convenience of like leveling skips and, the grind aspect of it. A lot of those features were added in and added as skips because I feel like MMO developers understand that players don't have the same amount of time that they used to have. So we need to find ways to make things either more convenient to level or lessening the grind or finding ways to make things a little bit easier. So I look at like Guild Wars 2. I love Guild Wars 2's model as far as grinding. Yes, you can grind for a legendary piece of gear, but once you have that piece of gear in that slot, you will never need another piece of gear for that particular slot. Never. It will fit any mold that you have because that is a reward for your grind. And that kind of horizontal progression is great. Account unlocks for Final Fantasy 14. I love. Okay, you did this, you never have to worry about it again. Bam, there you go. And a lot of the times they end up streamlining a lot of these quests just to make sure that it isn't too monotonous and too drawn out. What you're going to have to realize is that if you don't have a whole lot of time and you can't necessarily commit all that stuff to that particular grind, that may not be something that you'll be able to do. And I feel like developers on MMO side are starting to understand that, which is kind of why they even added in the idea of dungeon groups and raid finder and things like that, is because sitting in Shattrath City for an hour trying to find a tank for the Arcatraz is a pain in the neck. And they realize, okay, this is something that a lot of players are starting to say, I don't have the time to sit here and play, so I can't play the game, because I know if I want to get this one dungeon done, it's going to take me an hour and a half. I don't have that kind of time. The idea is to be able to streamline those processes and try to make it as easy for the user experience as possible. And I do understand why they did it. Yes, did they have to sacrifice a bit of the social aspect of it? Of course, but it still makes their game playable. So I would be a little hard pressed to really hate on them for that, because the convenient factor, especially in a game like this, like an MMO where it's sizable, there's a lot going on, I understand why. It has to happen because a lot of players don't necessarily have that kind of time. All in all, even though MMOs seem like they may be on a decline, I don't know necessarily if they are fully on their way out. I think that they have just shifted to meet where most MMO players are. I think they understand that players don't necessarily want to have to keep paying for a game that they can barely play. I think they understand that they don't have tons of hours throughout the day to be able to do whatever they need to in the game and then come back to real life and take care of everything here. I think there has been a major shift, and a lot of MMOs have picked up the idea of, okay, well, this is a pick up and play kind of game. You pick up and play whenever you want to. You know, some aspects you may have to redo down the line. I'm looking like World of Warcraft, you know, in their seasons and their expansions, even in like Classic or even Season of Discovery. You understand that that's the treadmill that you're going to be on in that game, and that's still something that you sign up for. Other MMOs are just saying, you know what, if you need to take a break from the game, take a break from the game. You know, we'll be here. There's these content cycles of like 3 to 5 months. You can play for a couple of weeks once it actually releases, and then say, you know what, I'm going to give this game a break and wait until new content comes out. And I feel like MMOs have really understand that they are a very seasonal kind of game. And I think that's what a lot of players like to say, you know, the dead MMOs. Oh, MMOs are dead. I think it's just because there really isn't anything new to do. You know, I feel like that has to be said. Personally, I love MMOs. This is my favorite gaming niche. It's the gaming niche that I've been a part of for the past 20 years. I've had some of my best experiences in gaming playing these type of games, and it's something I'm excited to see where the community goes and where the gaming niche ends up going. Because let's be serious, it's a niche now. You only really have between that and Age of Empires for the PC games. That was the one that you chose. Overall, I'd say MMOs are actually in a pretty good spot, all things considered. Now, one MMO that I recently tried, and I have mentioned a couple times in this video, is Pantheon: Rise of the Fallen. And the new player experience there is brutal, but it's like weirdly rewarding. And you can see that video here. Otherwise, stay caffeinated, folks.